Hi, everyone. My name is Martin Koehring. I'm the head of the Economist Group's World Ocean Initiative and sustainability lead at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Welcome to this panel on blue economy and private sector impact. I mean, this is such an important topic. I mean, the ocean makes a large and growing contribution to the global economy. It drives growth in economic activity, jobs, innovation, business opportunities. The value of the blue economy is estimated at $2.5 trillion annually. That's equivalent to the size of the world's 7th largest economy. The OECD projects the ocean contribution to the global economy to double in size by 2030 compared with 2010 levels. So as you can see, this is such an important topic economically, but also for business and society. At the Economist Group's World Ocean Initiative, we have highlighted these topics in our recent report on a sustainable ocean economy 2030. And the blue economy is highlighted there as really be more than the ocean economy. But blue economy really mean a sustainable ocean economy that harnesses marine ocean resources for long-term economic development and also social prosperity, of course, but also protecting the environment in perpetuity. So the blue economy is about harnessing opportunities for creating jobs, income, and growth, but also restoring ocean health. So what does this mean for key ocean-based sectors such as seafood, shipping, coastal tourism, renewable energy? So for seafood, for example, it means harnessing the potential of aquaculture, which could provide 2/3 of seafood for human consumption by 2030. But of course, in a sustainable way. So using sustainable feed and protecting fish health, for example. And we have a great speak on aquaculture as well on our panel that we'll discuss later. And for shipping, the blue economy means decarbonizing the shipping fleet, using cleaner fuels, alternative propulsion technologies. And we'll learn a little bit more about shipping and what is happening there in terms of sustainability initiatives later on in the panel. For coastal tourism, the blue economy means harnessing the potential of ecotourism to restore fragile ecosystems and involve tourists as well in conservation initiatives, for example. And for renewable energy, it means taking advantage of the enormous potential of offshore wind and also new opportunities for green hydrogen manufacturing, for example, for wave and tidal stream energy generation. Lots of exciting innovations, and we learn more about the importance of innovation later in the panel discussion. And building a blue economy also means tackling all kinds of ocean issues from source to sea. So for example, by building a circular economy for plastics, as well as restoring the ocean's ability to fight climate change. I mean, the ocean stores around 1/3 of the world's carbon dioxide. So it's really important to understand that link with the climate as well. So there are many stakeholders that need to work together. We're bringing several of those key stakeholders together to make this transition to a blue economy a reality. So policymakers, business, NGOs, scientists, and the general public, of course, as well. And some of the ocean's cross-cutting themes highlight the need for this collaboration and the need to unlock blue finance, for example. We have several speakers that know a lot about blue finance, and ocean data and technology capabilities as well. And of course, this is the decade that is also called the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. This offers a great framework for kind of a renewed emphasis on ocean science to facilitate many of the opportunities for the private sector to support a blue economy. And that's why today this panel will explore the great opportunities of the private sector in helping to build a blue economy. So I'm joined today by 4 excellent and very experienced panelists. I'm particularly excited because the panel highlights the various disciplines and the lenses through which we can examine and better understand the blue economy. So first of all, we have Amy Novogratz. She's the co-founder and managing partner at Aquaspark. This is a global investment fund that focuses on sustainable aquaculture business, building a portfolio ecosystem of companies all along the aquaculture value chain, working to solve industry challenges to develop the optimal aquaculture food system of the future. And then we have Marisa Drew. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer and Global Head for Sustainability Strategy, Advisory and Finance at Credit Suisse. She's responsible for setting the sustainability strategy and ambition for the bank and for creating and facilitating sustainable investments on behalf of Credit Suisse, wealth management, institutional and corporate clients. And then we have Elizabeth Petit Gonzalez. She's head of communications at the Sustainable Shipping Initiative. Her focus is on telling a positive story of multi-stakeholder engagement as a key driver of sustainable shipping. And last but not least, we have Ted Janulis. He's the founder and principal at Investable Oceans. His organization's mission is to simplify and accelerate market-based sustainable ocean investing across all asset classes and all sectors of the blue economy. It's great that we have such a diverse panel pulling together the multiple elements that we mentioned that are part of the blue economy: food, finance, transportation, innovation. So I would like to structure today's discussion in four parts. I mean, first of all, I would look at the blue economy and what it means for different industries. And of course, we have great industry representation on the panel. Then I would look at the evolution of blue economy, industries and opportunities. So this is all about looking at what kind of evolution are we seeing across, for example, aquaculture, shipping, and the various industries. And then hopefully we'll also be able to talk a little bit about the ocean governance dimension, because all these kind of financial and innovation opportunities can't really work if there isn't good governance. So this section will then focus on ocean governance for blue economy industries. And hopefully finally we'll have a bit of an opportunity to just talk about what are the priorities going forward in terms of establishing a sustainable blue economy. So let's get started on the blue economy and what it means for different industries. So first of all, I would like to start with Amy. What does the blue economy mean to you, particularly to your industry, of course, aquaculture and investment?
So I think it's developing and investing in businesses that are concerned with the ocean's health. And when you look at aquaculture, we actually really see it as a solution to the ocean. We depend greatly on the ocean for food, for protein, and we can do much better with aquaculture than we currently are, and we should really prioritize that.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much, Amy. I mean, it's really important to highlight why aquaculture is such an important part of the blue economy. And of course, investment is crucial. And Marisa, you, of course, work in the finance industry. I mean, what does the blue economy mean to you? I mean, particularly when it comes to financial services.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I feel like my day job is to mobilize capital for positive environmental and social outcomes. And the blue economy fits squarely in this idea that if we can find really sound and robust investment propositions, the capital will flow, and that helps us to protect and conserve this precious resource. So when we think about the oceans, I like to frame it contextually, the way we speak at Credit Suisse, along our sustainability triangle of themes. And those are disruption. And so that really speaks to this whole world and many of the areas where Amy is investing her funds in innovative, disruptive companies, whether it's alternative food or new ways to think about aquaculture and so on. So often venture stage type businesses, earlier stage type businesses that have a high risk but very high return potential. Then the second leg of the triangle is transition, because we know we need to be moving mature industries and some of those that have been around for a very long time that haven't thought about their ocean footprint in terms of their impact every day on what they do. So this notion of helping to raise capital to finance the transition, and that could include industries that we'll talk about today, like shipping. And contextually, how do you invest behind that to allow those companies to fund the capital investment required? And then finally, the third leg of the triangle is protection or conservation. And in that arena, we're starting to see a whole emerging field that is focusing on financially material metrics to identify areas like biodiversity, which is so critical because the oceans are rich with biodiversity, which help protect our planet. But you can actually invest behind them, because what we're finding is natural capital solutions, in many cases, are more efficient or generate better returns than many man-made solutions. So these are the three themes that we think about in the ocean, and that allows us to help frame this for the investment community.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Marisa. And it's good to have this framework. We'll also look at the different stages in which companies are. And you mentioned finance in the transition in shipping. And this is obviously something that is very important to Elizabeth. I mean, what does the blue economy mean to you, particularly to your industry, shipping?
Thank you, Martin, and it's great to be here. I think for me, blue economy really means a systems view of oceans and what they do for us. You know, it's as food sources, as Amy said, as power sources, as enablers of global trade, particularly, of course, in shipping. Shipping transports the majority of goods traded globally. I think it's something like 80%. And if you look at the screen that you're watching this on, the shirt that you're wearing, at least one of these items probably traveled by sea to get to you. And not only that, but despite having the lowest sort of carbon footprint of any mode of transportation per ton transported, shipping accounts for about 3% of global GHG emissions. So as you mentioned, decarbonization is a huge challenge, particularly as the industry is only expected to grow. So if we ignore for a second that shipping happens at sea and sort of the very real impacts that it has on the marine environment, it still contributes to the impacts of the climate crisis on our oceans. So of course, as the shipping person on the panel, I'll say that a sustainable shipping industry is a big part of what we need for a sustainable blue economy, both in terms of reducing emissions, but also going beyond that and addressing and mitigating shipping's impacts on the oceans. And that's a big project that involves a lot of stakeholder groups, a lot of different areas of concerns. It's decarbonization, as you mentioned, it's seafarers' rights, it's ports and coastal communities that are impacted by shipping, transparency, finance, which I'm sure we'll go into in this panel as well. And all of these areas are really elements of a broader system, which can help us see the bigger picture for what a sustainable blue economy can be. And that's just shipping. I'm sure there is just as much to talk about when we're looking at fishing, when we're looking at offshore energy, when we're looking at communities. And for us, the most important thing is to really bring these pieces of the puzzle together. So happy to be here today to have this conversation with these other sectors.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. You highlighted this a really important part, which is the systems view and having different stakeholder groups and looking beyond your industry, which is really important. And that's something that, Ted, you have done throughout your career. You focus a lot on innovation. I mean, what does the blue economy mean to you, particularly to your focus on innovation?
Thank you very much. We've heard some great definitions of blue economy already, starting with you, Martin, and the other panelists all had terrific definitions. If you look on our site, which is again dedicated to at-market investing, and I would stress that our focus on that is not that that's the be-all and end-all. We think that philanthropy, NGOs, governmental investment, so many other elements come together, but we try to be additive by thinking about, as Marisa's talked about as well, the capital markets element to it. So if you look at our site, you'll see energy solutions, fisheries and aquaculture, plastics, shipping and tourism, those classic horizons, if you will. But I'd like to give just a slightly different take on it, which is if you think about all the things that human beings do in the ocean around the globe, whether it's swimming or sailing or fishing, taking things out, putting things in, there's a parallel there between all those disparate and global activities and the ocean economy. And the ocean economy is also the summation of all those things that companies and individuals and institutions are doing in the oceans. And that together is the ocean economy. When we then talk about the blue economy, it's tempting to sort of point to the things that are the blue economy that we should invest in. I think it's also important to remember that a lot of the things that go on in the ocean economy aren't fixable or aren't going to go away soon or aren't going to change immediately. So I would encourage us also to think about a bluer ocean economy or a bluer blue economy. And that's sort of a variation on the there is no silver bullet theme, which is that rather than think just specifically about certain things, back to the systems thinking that we just heard about, think about it more broadly in the context of every way that organizations, institutions, individuals touch the ocean. We should be looking at the very best ways we can improve that to make it as blue as we can.
Thanks a lot, Ted. And you highlighted something that's really important, which is, this kind of evolution in a way. I mean, it's step-by-step improvement, and some of the issues might not go away immediately, but we can get closer to the sustainable ocean economy, a bluer ocean economy, as you said. And that is a nice transition as well to kind of talking about the evolution of blue economy industries and opportunities. I'd like to go back to Amy. Your fund started almost a decade ago. How has the market changed and how has your learning curve been?
So we started exploring aquaculture just exactly a decade ago. And it was at a moment where conservationists were starting to say, hold on, we've been kind of saying aquaculture is a bad thing, but we actually need to get involved. And so we saw the potential for really good aquaculture. We don't need to depend on fish meal and fish oil. We can do things much more efficiently. We can control, we can find new ways to monitor for disease and treat disease, and we should be doing that. But at the time, there were a few really striking things. One, how huge aquaculture already was. It wasn't then as big as wild caught for consumption, but it almost was, and we knew so little about it. It was incredibly opaque, and there were no outside investors investing into aquaculture, except for a few of the big listed companies. There was no investment going into aquaculture. We knew technology was going to be a big solution for aquaculture, but there was very little investable technology at the time. Cut to 10 years later, and we're just really beginning the boom. It's really, this last year and a half actually was helpful for a focus on resilient food systems and our planet's health and what we can all do better. Because aquaculture really is just starting to boom when you look at who is entering the space. I mean, we closed two rounds with two of our portfolio companies in the last 2 months, and they were oversubscribed. In both cases, they were all investors that were new to aquaculture for the first time. Most of the cases, they were venture investors. Investment-wise, it's heating up. Deal flow-wise, thanks to accelerators, thanks to kind of the decades of research and development that have happened before we even got involved, business plan competitions, et cetera. There is kind of a better pipeline for investable companies in aquaculture, and people are seeing the different kind of subsectors of aquaculture and different opportunities around alternative feed ingredients, around different types of systems and farming operations, technologies, disease battling. There's ample opportunity for kind of redesigning how we farm fish and shrimp.
Great, thanks a lot, Amy. And it's really great to see this evolution within a decade. I mean, from all the subsectors you mentioned, feeding, tech, disease, and you know, there's so much venture capitalism still, and new investors coming in that hadn't even heard about the sector before. And this is also something, of course, Marisa, that you're seeing. I mean, I'm curious about how the capital markets are engaging now with in the blue economy, building on what Amy said. How has investor interest evolved in recent years, and where is it going?
Sure. Well, the exciting thing is that we are seeing such an enormous level of interest from the investment community. And these are not only individuals and venture capital investors, usually who are making direct investments in small companies or early stage companies, but we're starting to galvanize the interest of the institutional community, which run big pools of capital. And that's quite exciting because, you know, when you start to attract that form of capital, then you can really scale these solutions. And that's what's so desperately needed. So what we're finding is, number one, the interest level is extremely high. The recognition now about just how important the oceans are is very much there. It's in the mindset of the investment community. And thank you, frankly, to organizations like the UN and also to the media for keeping it in the spotlight and helping us raise awareness. But following awareness then comes the desire to act. And where we saw the gap 18 months or 2 years ago was that the interest was there, but you had a dearth of investable opportunities, particularly in scale for these institutions. So you needed structures that speak to them and what their charters are and what their investment needs are. And now what we see, and this is in real time, is that there is a wonderful proliferation of investment opportunities across different asset classes. And Ted's spending a lot of time on this. So if you want a debt solution, there's an opportunity. If you want venture, we experimented in the public equity space using the concept of shareholder engagement. That is using your power as a shareholder and your voting power and your investment power to drive behavior change. And so that speaks to that transition concept that we talked about making companies more aware of their environmental footprint and then acting on that in order to create both value for themselves, but also for their investors. So what's very exciting to me is capital's moving in scale, institutional size, and if you wanted to develop a diverse portfolio, which is one of the keys to smart investing, you actually have the opportunity to begin to do that now.
Amazing. That's really great to see, Marisa. And you mentioned that, you know, now there's a lot of opportunity across different asset classes different scales, and the size of projects is increasing. Interest levels are rising. Before going to Elizabeth, I wanted to just follow up because you mentioned TED. So that's TED. You can look back on a long business career in finance, investment, and innovation, and given your experience with the sustainable investing and some of the themes you also heard from Amy and Marisa just now, how do you see the evolution of the ocean innovation ecosystem in recent years, and where's it heading?
Thank you. And those are both terrific additions to the conversation. I think the same momentum that you heard about from Amy and Marisa is true in the innovation sector. There are around the world sprouting up. There's probably close to 200 now innovation organizations, whether they're accelerators, incubators, venture funds, a combination of all the above. And they're in Oslo and Cape Town and Sydney and Hong Kong. It's this wonderful innovation network that's growing all over the globe. What's a good thing on top of that is that there's also some structure that's coming together. And it's things like, honestly, what the Economist is doing, the World Economic Forum, the UN, making it like a year-long thing, not just a once a year kind of affair. But I think there's real structure that you can see. So it's nice to have the Decade of the Oceans that the UN has proclaimed. It's good to have the high-level panel with its work streams. And you're seeing a lot of organizing institutions come up. Some recent announcements were 1,000 startups with let's get 1,000 startups launched with this global community by 2030. Ocean Visions, which is a huge consortium that's focused on getting research out of the university and research institution out into the ocean. So you, on the one hand, you've got this explosion of creativity, but you've also got this wonderful coming together of some structure. What I would say, though, is then you have to pull the camera back and look at the broader picture. In the same way that the entrepreneur is supported by that innovation organization, you need more structure and support than that. And that comes back to one of the things that the UN has been so fantastic at promoting and really doing substantial work on all around the globe is capacity building. Because you can have the greatest ideas in the world, but if you don't get that nurturing and support that on one level, the incubators and accelerators give you, that investors give you, but you also need to plant those seeds in places where they'll hold and grow and survive. Whether it's trauma or generational change, they've got to be things that can really grow. So in thinking about the innovation network, I would also encourage us to not only think about the really incredible things that are being done in the laboratory and with seaweed and with plastics, all of which are fantastic and so vital, but really pull the camera back and look at the whole picture and saying, are these solving real needs? And are they being developed in places around the globe where they really can have the legal, political, technical, knowledge-based infrastructure to help them flourish over a long period of time?
And thanks for asking those questions, because that's really important. I mean, you mentioned the innovation network is growing and lots of great initiatives, startups emerging, explosion of creativity, but are they really solving real needs? That's a great question. And of course, the shipping industry has seen a lot of evolution as well and innovation as well. I mean, there have been many exciting developments from the international targets to reduce emissions by half by mid-century. There's also the Poseidon principles and integrating climate considerations into lending decisions for shipping companies. And of course, Elizabeth, at the Sustainable Shipping Initiative, you have a great multi-stakeholder initiative that started more than a decade ago. In your view, how has the shipping industry evolved since you started, and is it on the right trajectory?
I think it's absolutely on the right trajectory, and actually just building on what Ted was speaking about, there's so much momentum building. There's so many initiatives coming up and so much work being done, particularly when we look at decarbonization, which is of course the primary challenge that shipping is tackling right now. As I mentioned, it's 3% of global GHG emissions. So just looking at that challenge in and of itself, it's a mammoth task to be able to tackle it. And it's been very inspiring from our perspective to see the industry coming together around this challenge. And it's shown us that it can be done. It's shown us that change is possible, but it requires really that multi-stakeholder collaboration. It requires investment in new technologies. It requires pressure from different stakeholder groups. So we have the regulatory side with the International Maritime Organization. We have, as you mentioned, the banks through the Poseidon principles working to decarbonize their finance, their ship finance portfolios. You have cargo owners. So whether we're looking at retailers who are looking at their Scope 3 emissions, through, for example, the Science-Based Targets Initiative, and who are trying to look at how to reduce emissions from their transportation activities. And Ted, you mentioned, there's no silver bullet, and that's definitely a phrase that gets thrown around in shipping a lot, because there really is no silver bullet when it comes to decarbonization. We will need a breadth of fuels, technologies, and different options to achieve the scale that we need to achieve to decarbonize the industry. But it's certainly been inspiring to watch it come together and to watch the industry come together through, for example, the Getting to Zero Coalition, through, for example, sustainable finance, which is becoming more and more of a topic, where we have sustainability-linked loans and bonds, which are linked to companies' decarbonization targets and performance.
Great, that's amazing. And I mean, you highlighted, Elizabeth, a lot the need for different stakeholders to come together. And industry is seeing that. I mean, you're seeing that in the shipping industry, coming together around that challenge of decarbonization, but also the supply chain pressures that you mentioned, Science-Based Target Initiative, for example. But no silver bullet, as you mentioned. But one aspect that is really important throughout this is really also the kind of incentives that exist. So I'd like to a little bit talk about, this kind of the governance structure that we have in the blue economy and what is needed from policymakers. And of course, at the Economist Group's World Ocean Initiative, we have identified 3 levers of change to build a sustainable ocean economy. Blue finance, innovation, we have talked a lot about those, but also governance is one of the 3 key pillars. And we've talked about the importance of finance innovations. And since we are celebrating the UN World Ocean Day, I want to hone in on ocean governance a bit more and what kind of governance structure supports sustainable ocean business. So Amy, with your experience in aquaculture investing, what kind of governance can help to support sustainable aquaculture?
Well, if you think of the few things that are really holding aquaculture back from being truly sustainable, it's feed, it's disease and how we battle disease. And both of those things are moving very slow because of the regulatory process. So there's work to be done there for sure. And now we're working with cell-based seafood companies, and it's actually moving faster in certain markets. But still, there's a lot we can do around finding a way to improve a pathway toward regulations. And we've seen in some of our examples of portfolio companies that when subsectors and groups work together, and at first kind of within their region and then take on a bigger approach, it speeds things up for sure. We saw that with insects and regulating insects as a feed ingredient in aquaculture. We're seeing it now in the cell-based arena. So I think that there's a lot to do around kind of facilitating these subsectors and their pathway towards regulation.
Great, thanks a lot, Amy. And you highlighted a lot, these subsectors that are emerging that require this new governance structure. And I mean, Marisa, of course, for you, governance is a crucial part of your work. In addition to your role at Credit Suisse, you sit on several high-level working groups sponsored by the UN as well, for example. And what does good governance look like for you?
Well, so often we think of governance as being purely in the realm of government or regulators or policymakers, but I also want to make sure that we focus a little bit on self-governance. So industries taking control as well, because if we think about how critical this is from a speed point of view, we do need to accelerate, and sometimes the private sector can actually move more quickly. So there I might point to, particularly we're talking about the blue economy. If we take something out of the playbook, which has been very successful at the mobilization of capital, it's the green bond market. So you have what governs the green bond market, a set of green bond principles. And one way to really attract capital is to create confidence, so that the investment community says, when we call something green, here's what we mean by green. And we need to do the same thing in some respects in blue. And once again, I would highlight the work that a lot of us are doing with the UN in a collaborative way to create a set of blue bond principles, so that when investors are saying, I want to invest in a public debt instrument that we're calling a blue bond, we know what we're talking about. And that level of sort of self, I'd say, governance in a way, holding ourselves to a high account, is one way to create that confidence. The other thing that I would point to as well is when we think about the role of governance and policy making broadly defined to incite action. Right? What are investors looking for? They're looking for investments that are going to generate value for them. Well, what can you do as a policymaker or regulator? It's often to provide those enabling conditions which will create value in a sector. So wonderful examples, maybe in the ocean space as well, is to think about the redirection of subsidies. So many subsidies today have been grounded in promoting or fostering unsustainable businesses. Right? So if we just redirect some of those subsidies into areas like decarbonization of shipping, like aquaculture, immediately then you create value opportunities for the investment community and that capital follows. So there's lots of ways that we can think about governance contextually. And the final thing I'll point to, though, which I think, as we want to balance our enthusiasm, because I think we're all violent optimists on this call, or else we wouldn't be doing what we're doing every day. But at the same time, we also have to sometimes be pragmatic about challenges. And one of the ones that I see, we still struggle with is the fact that no one owns the high seas, right? No one owns, once you get 200 miles outside of the coastline. And without that ownership and a collective responsibility in some form of governance, in a NATO-like or cross-governmental collaboration of what should and shouldn't happen, unfortunately, it does leave itself for continued opportunities for bad actors. And so I do think that those sorts of collaborative maritime laws, fishing laws, those sorts of things are going to be a necessary ingredient for us to come up with a truly long-term sustainable solution in our oceans.
Thanks a lot, Marisa. I mean, that's really important to highlight. I mean, both the, working with the UN on, things like the Blue Bond principles, also the self-governance aspect you mentioned, the need to create that enabling environment to create confidence, but also remaining pragmatic. And you did mention a couple of really important aspects also on redirecting some of maybe subsidies and funds into, the sustainable ocean economy, for example, in the decarbonization of shipping. And of course, Elizabeth, this is a topic that we talked about, this very important for your sector. There's lots of regulation in the shipping industry. There's also, for example, energy efficiency regulation, and of course, the new decarbonization targets we mentioned. What does good governance look like when it comes to building a sustainable shipping industry?
Well, I think Marisa's really touched on something here when she mentioned that no one owns the high seas and no one sort of governs the high seas. And this is something that's been a huge issue for shipping, because shipping is a completely global industry. A ship will be built maybe in Japan, South Korea. It'll be owned by a shipping company that's headquartered in Canada, that then operates under the flag of Panama and travels all over the world with seafarers from India, from the Philippines. And so it's an industry that's really struggled with that governance and sort of global governance framework. And what we've learned is that it needs to be global. It absolutely needs to be global, and it needs to apply to everyone. And it needs to be multi-stakeholder. So regulation is an important part of the equation, but so is industry leadership. Across all sectors, and that sort of self-governance aspect, that transparency, is something that shipping is really sort of working toward, is improving transparency across the value chain. A couple of, I just wanted to mention as well the UN Global Compact Sustainable Ocean Principles, which are a great tool. They just released, I think it was last week, a sectoral guidance for shipping, looking at precisely what the industry can do to advance the sustainable oceans agenda. And a lot of that is through decarbonization, but there are also other issues to think about. So there's also, there's human rights, there's transparency, there's sustainable finance, there's port and coastal communities that are impacted by shipping activities. So it's really, decarbonization is the big challenge now for shipping, but we really need to look at everything, which of course it's very easy to say and much harder to do, but it is important to kind of consider all of those aspects when when we try to tackle these issues.
Yes, that's a great point, Elizabeth. I mean, this holistic view is very important. You mentioned the need for transparency, but also the need for, sometimes, guidance and good guidance, the Global Compact, for example, and these partnerships and these multi-stakeholder initiatives. And of course, Ted, I mean, your work has all been about capacity building. I mean, you're focused on integrating financial initiatives into the capacity building imperative for the ocean economy. And of course, good governance is crucial to stimulate both investment and innovation. So in your opinion, what is the role of ocean governance and which challenges need to be overcome?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe what I'll do, I know we're running short on time, so I'll just pick up Marisa's point maybe on the confidence question. Another way of talking about that, I think, is to talk about risk and in particular risk layering when you have more than one risk. So if you're an investor or a funder trying to figure out, does this model around this particular item work? If you have to also think about uncertainties with social license and regulatory and political and the environment that you're in, as those risks compound, the likelihood of getting something done goes down. If someone's got to struggle with one thing or two things, they can do that, get their mindset. But the more you can take out these uncertainties, the better chance you have for success. And I think you've heard a really good laundry list. I shouldn't call it a laundry list, but a good listing of the kinds of things that are out there. And it is a BBNJ, the high seas questions, or the local regulatory piece, or what the governments can do. I think it's another version of back to the holistic comment. You've got to keep pushing on all of those. But the more you can knock those out and de-risk the process, the easier it will be to attract investments and scale in the long term.
Great, thanks a lot, Ted. And it's such an important point to highlight, the compound risk and the need for de-risking. As you mentioned, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but just a final question. I'd ask you to be very brief, please, to all of the panelists. I really want to kind of hone in on what your key priorities are. So what is your number one priority for creating a sustainable blue economy? Very briefly, please, Amy.
It's to get the right investment into aquaculture, to scale some of these solutions that are already showing that they're working, to kind of make the transformation happen. It's making sure we have track record and examples and create the right framework for investing into this industry and helping to develop it in the right way.
Right, thanks a lot. So yeah, I mean, getting the right frameworks, as you said, is super important. And Marisa, what is your number one priority for creating sustainable blue economy? You're muted, Marisa.
Sorry. Yeah, so it's my day job. It's my number one priority is to try to fill an entire pipeline across asset classes of blue economy options so that investors could either take the Chinese menu approach and say, I want to dip into this, this, or this, or they could build that diversified portfolio. And in order to do that, we do need some common sets of standards, some common taxonomy, some cross-stakeholder agreement, and a whole big fat dose, I think, of self-regulation and peer pressure. Because, I point to something like the Poseidon Principles. That's a voluntary organization. And when you sign on, you're committing to do certain things. And I think then all of a sudden, when you get enough people saying, I'm going to sign on to something like that, immediately then what do? You now create almost the bar for what good looks like, and that crowds in other like-minded actors. So that's an exciting place for us to, I think, drive toward as we think about our wonderful ocean economy. Brilliant,
thanks a lot, Marisa. And that peer pressure that you mentioned, I mean, that is definitely something that is happening. We actually discussed several of those instances where there's now a focus on towards sustainability, which is great, and that is a kind of a drive to the top rather than a race to the bottom. So that's great. And Elizabeth, what is your number one priority for creating a sustainable blue economy?
So I'll kick us off with a bit of a cliche, which is dialogue and collaboration. And I'll sort of keep hammering on about we need dialogue and collaboration across sectors to be able to make this happen. But I actually wanted to close on a slightly different note, bringing it back to this year's theme of life and livelihoods. And that was to just mention the ongoing crew change crisis and the issues that seafarers are facing as a result of the pandemic and travel restrictions. At its peak, this meant over 200,000 seafarers on board beyond the duration of their contracts, and 200,000 seafarers at home, unable to earn a living because they were unable to get to their vessels. And so I think seafarers have kept our supply chains running through the pandemic, and they primarily have done this out of sight and out of mind at sea. So what I want to leave our audience with today is the need for any sustainable blue economy to really consider the health and well-being of its people. So really tackling the social at the same level as the economic and the environmental factors.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's often neglected, as you said. I mean, that aspect of a kind of social sustainability in the ocean economy, and bringing it back to the life and livelihoods theme of the day is really a great way of summarizing this. And obviously, Ted, what is your number one priority for creating a sustainable blue economy?
Well, what we focus on day to day is trying to connect people and organizations. We talked about all the wonderful things that are happening in innovation and growth and things like, excuse me, in Amy's fund and what Marisa is doing, what happening in shipping. All these things are so important. And we think there's a lot of just connecting to be done to match these folks together. So that's where we spend our time. Tied with number one is capacity building. And I don't say that facetiously. I really, really mean it, that this innovation and this interest and this acceleration is fantastic. And there's so many wonderful people doing so many great things. I just think we have to keep in mind what we're solving for and what the needs actually are, and building things that ultimately are very useful and meaningful over long periods of time across the globe in a very inclusive way.
Great, thanks a lot. That's a great summary. And capacity building is such an important aspect in the ocean economy, and bringing the different stakeholders together to build capacity together is a great way forward. So thank you very much. I mean, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but it's been a great conversation. And I'd just like to summarize. I mean, as you said, capacity building, governance regimes are crucial. Bringing governance with business together. I mean, the theme of connecting was something that I've heard a lot today. I mean, multi-stakeholder cooperation. Of course, the incentivizing self-regulation as well. I mean, peer pressure was mentioned, which is important. And of course, dialogue and cooperation. And the aspect of social sustainability, maybe a neglected topic, as was highlighted by Elizabeth, and the need to de-risk some of these kind of investments. I mean, the compound risk that Ted mentioned. And of course, frameworks and good governance are crucial to create that and create an environment for de-risking. And bringing projects and investors together, really, this is something that we have heard a lot today. And there's so much excitement in aquaculture, blue finance, shipping, of course, and innovation. So it was great to have you all here. Thank you so much again to the panelists for the fantastic insights. And thank you also to the audience. And join us for the next session and enjoy the rest of World Ocean Day. Thank you very much.